All right, our Big East team previews continue. Next up on the list is UConn, the final team that we're previewing here on MusketeerReport.com. And joining me for this one is Dave Borges from the New Haven Register. Dave, first of all, thank you for joining me here on the weekend. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Getting excited for college basketball.
That's a great time of year. Dave, this is what I've been saying about this UConn team. I'm curious to get your opinion on it. I've said this team might be worse than last year's team in just about every way, but they should still be seen as the favorite in the Big East and a very legitimate threat to three-peat as national champions. What would be your reaction to that? Is that fair? Is that inaccurate? Where would you go from there?
Yeah, I think I don't think they have maybe as much overall talent. I don't know if they have two NBA lottery picks in their midst. I mean, at least for next year. I mean, they might have one kid, Liam McNeely, could be a lottery pick, but that remains to be seen. I don't think they have 4 pending NBA draft picks. I think maybe 4 guys on the team could end up playing in the NBA someday, but I do think that they have more depth. I think 1 to 9, maybe even 1 to 10. They have more overall depth, guys fighting for playing time than they even did last year, which is kind of amazing because we all saw how great they were last year. But they basically had an 8-man rotation last year, and even the 8th guy, wasn't always a huge contributor. So, and I don't know if you can play 10, 11 guys nowadays. Dan Hurley is going to probably have to cut some guys playing time a little bit at some point during the season. But right now they have at least 10 guys fighting for spots to get into that kind of vaunted, coveted 8-man rotation.
You mentioned the potential lack of maybe top-end talent, maybe not quite as intimidating as last year's roster was in terms of the NBA talent. But who is going to be this team's go-to player or best player? Obviously, we all know about Alex Karaban. I think some people, including myself, are thinking maybe he's better suited to be more of a Robin than a Batman. Is that the case, or who do you think is going to be their go-to player?
Well, I think it'll be Karaban. I mean, I understand that thinking, but he's mature. He's a mature player. He can do he can do everything, really. He's not just a shooter. He's a smart player, good passer. He can get in and rebound. I think he can do a lot of different things. And he's becoming more of a vocal leader as well. He really wants. Oh, this is a year where he can do a lot of things. I mean, he can play himself into the first round of the NBA draft, which is very important to him. And obviously, he can win a 3rd straight national title, which very few players have ever done. So I would say it's Karaban. I think, as previously mentioned, Liam McNeely is going to be a huge factor for this team. He is just a freshman, and right now he's dealing with a little bit of a calf injury, but by midseason, I think he'll be one of the top scorers on the team. To cut it short, I would say I do think Karaban has the capacity to sort of be the number 1 guy.
You mentioned Liam McNeely there, so let's go to him for a second. He seems like he was built in a lab to play in this system for this coaching staff. How would you describe his game?
Yeah, just 6'7" kid who's a shooter, who's incredibly tenacious. He's going to be a guy who probably isn't the most popular guy in road crowds. They'll probably get on him. He almost, I guess, his good friend and former teammate is Cooper Flagg, and I guess he's kind of a similar player to Cooper Flagg. Maybe not quite as talented, but just a really fundamentally sound, great shooter, scorer, and again has the perfect temperament to play for a guy like Dan Hurley, who is as intense as they get.
Yeah, really cerebral player too. It just seems like he'll see the game the way Hurley likes his players to. A couple of guys that I'm really intrigued by, Solo Ball and Jalen Stewart. Are you expecting these 2 guys to take major steps forward with another year of experience in the program?
I think so. I mean, Solo Ball was thrust into the starting lineup back last year around December when Steph Castle was out injured, and had some big games. Had a really good game against North Carolina at Madison Square Garden, and ultimately, kind of when Castle came back, his playing time receded quite a bit, and at times the game got a little too fast for him. And then by February, Stewart, who was kind of slowed by injuries early in the season, sort of became that 8th man in the rotation. I love Jalen Stewart. He's a very versatile, 6'6", 6'7" kid who's deceptively athletic. He can shoot. Needs to play defense a little better, but he's like a kind of a throwback, a really good passer, a really good distributor. I think both those guys. Ball has been really impressive in practices. I've been told he was very impressive in an exhibition game against URI. Didn't shoot well last year, but the staff has said all along he's a much better shooter than he's shown, and he shot. I think he hit 3 or 4 3-pointers against URI in that exhibition game. So, I think both guys. I think Ball could be the starting shooting guard, and Stewart. He might have McNeely ahead of him as sort of a small forward, but he's going to play a lot because he's also versatile. He can play just about any position on the floor except maybe point guard.
What about the center position? I look at Samson Johnson returning from last year's team after being the backup to Donovan Clingan, and then they bring in Terrace Reed from Michigan, who seems like a bit more physical, a bigger body, can rebound a little bit better, maybe a bit more skilled on offense. What should the expectation be at that position? Is Reed looking to potentially overtake the starting job there at some point, or is it more of a Samson's kind of the incumbent starter and Reed will back him up?
I think it's funny. I think they'd like to have Samson start. I think he's sort of earned his stripes, and it's almost like 2 years ago, Clingan backed up Adama Sanogo. Last year, Johnson backed up Clingan. Now it's Johnson's turn to start. But we'll see what happens throughout the season. I mean, like you said, Terrace Reed's more of a traditional back to the basket, kind of an Adama Sanogo type player. A little bigger and stronger, maybe not as talented. But I think the coaching staff believes they can really coach him up. I think they felt he maybe didn't get the best, coaching at Michigan the last couple of years. So, it's going to be the thing about the center position, though, is it's going to be a two-headed monster again. It could be very effective, but it will be very different because you're not going to have a 7-footer in Clingan, either starting or off the bench. And Samson Johnson is a different type of player. They want to make him sort of an Oso Ighodaro type player, the kid from Marquette who's now in the NBA, facing the basket a little more, distributing, and he's a great rim runner, great rim protector, but very different player than Clingan and Sanogo. And so it's going to be a different look, but it could be a very effective one for UConn.
One more individual that I wanted to ask you about is Aiden Mahaney, the transfer from St. Mary's. And he's a guy that I got to watch a lot. I broadcast NKU's game. We actually went to St. Mary's last year, and I saw him in person. So he didn't quite have the sophomore jump that I think people at St. Mary's may have expected, but he still had another really successful season following up on his freshman year where he was very impressive. I don't think he's the same player as Cam Spencer. He's not as tough defensively. He's not going to do the same things. But is it possible that he might be sort of that perfect fit for Dan Hurley and this coaching staff in the way that Cam Spencer was, to where they'll bring out the best of him?
Yeah, we'll see. It's going to be interesting. The things I've heard about him since the summer is that he's not a big. He needs to get stronger. He's kind of slight of build. They list him as, I think, 6'3", 175 and 180, and that's maybe a little generous. So there was a little trepidation, wondering, but then he went out and played very well. Again, it's just one game. It's an exhibition game against Rhode Island. Played very well that game, shot the ball well. He's a fundamentally sound kid. He's a real wild card this year. I'm really interested to see. He's going to play some point and some two. And if he can, contribute as a big time shooter, which he averaged, like you said, he averaged exactly 13.9 points per game as both a freshman and a sophomore at St. Mary's. So that's kind of good and bad because obviously there wasn't a big jump. But he feels under this coaching staff, which is as good as anyone in the country, he'll make that jump this year. He's really interesting. It'll be interesting to see how he does. Of course, UConn beat him in St. Mary's in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago. So now. As they say, you can't beat him, you join him. But it's all good. It'll be interesting to see what his role is this year.
All right, looking at that starting lineup, Hassan Diarra, Solo Ball, Liam McNeely, Alex Caravan, and Samson Johnson is what I have right now. Do you think that's locked in pretty much, or is there a chance we might see something different?
I would say it's not locked in. I think Dan Hurley has publicly said, I think this is my own opinion, Hassan Diarra was so effective off the bench last year. He's the Big East Six-Man Award winner. He's earned his stripes like Samson, and now it's time for him to start, right? But I wonder if the staff just feels like he would still help the team more as that energy spark off the bench. Obviously, he'll play more and be more of a factor, but I think that's a starting five I've had for a while now. I do think it'll be subject to change throughout the year. I mean, Caraban's going to start. McNeely probably won't play in the first game, so you'll have someone different there, maybe Jalen Stewart. But I think at different times this year, you might see Terrace Reed take over the starting center position. You might see, Mahaney start instead of Diarra. But right now, I like those five. Other than, of course, like I said, McNeely. You probably see Jalen Stewart in there on opening night.
Hit on this a little bit at the very top of the interview here. Strengths and weaknesses. You mentioned the depth as potentially being a strength for this team. Is there anything else that stands out to you? Well,
shooting. I mean, I think this team will be a better shooting team than last year. And again, last year's team went 37-3, so it's tough to improve on that. But as far as shooting depth, they have 5 or 6 guys who can flirt with maybe being a 40% 3-point shooter. I don't think all 5 or 6 will, but I think a few of them could emerge as that. Even Caraban didn't shoot as well last year as he did as a freshman. So you add McNeely to the mix, Mahaney. I think Hassan Diarra has improved as a shooter. A kid named Jaden Ross, who we haven't mentioned yet, he's a sophomore. He's going to be fighting hard for playing time, but he can do a lot of different things, and he can shoot a little bit. So I think the team will be a little different looking because I think they'll be more reliant on the 3-pointer this year, and that could be one of their big strengths.
And what about weaknesses? Is there anything there that jumps out to you?
Well, I would say, by and large, experience. I mean, they do have 3 guys who've won 2 national championships. Caraban, Diarra, and Johnson. Now, Diarra and Johnson were sort of bit players, particularly for the first championship. But they're going to be relying on a couple of transfers in Reed and Mahaney, potentially 3 freshmen in McNeely, Ahmad Noel, a point guard, and possibly Isaiah Abraham, a wing. And some sophomores who we've mentioned who made some contributions last year, but didn't play major roles. Now they're going to be asked to play major roles. So they're going to be relying on a lot of guys who haven't really played a whole lot on the college level, or at least either on the college level or in Dan Hurley's program. So that's going to be interesting to see how it sorts itself out. But you got to. This coaching staff has earned the benefit of the doubt that they'll make it work at some point. There might be some. I wouldn't be shocked if there's some growing pains and maybe even a loss or two, unexpected loss or 2 early in the season. But you have to believe that they'll get it going by January, February.
All right, final thought here, Dave. The 3-peat on a scale of 1 to 10. How confident are you that they can pull it off this year?
I mean, it's so hard to do. But you can't. How do you bet against Hurley? What he's done, we did last year. 2 years ago, they were unranked going into the regular season. They win it all. Last year, they were picked to finish 3rd in the Big East. And as Dan Hurley will tell you, every time they were closer to 4th and 2nd in the coaches poll. And they ended up being one of the, and I'm not exaggerating here, one of the greater college basketball teams of all time. So, I guess to answer your question, I mean, it's just so hard to do, but I'd say there's a, what do you want to say, 4 out of 10 chance that they could repeat this year. I mean, once they get to March, they tend to dominate in the tournament, and they don't even have to dominate. They can just, you don't have to win by 22 points a game like they did last year. They can find ways to win. I'd say there's a 30-40% chance that they could repeat, and that's saying a lot, I think.
There we go. All are 10, and you include Xavier in there as well. We talked about them plenty this preseason. 11 Big East team previews are in the books. Dave, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
All right, no problem, Rick. Thanks.
All right, and thanks all of you for watching.